I want to continue from last lecture. I gave you one last example about optimal power flows and how prices are formed. And there were three cases that I wanted to show you to give you to make three messages clear. Before doing that, I'll quickly review the optimal power flow problem and the KKT conditions, and then we can jump to the example and analyze it further today. Okay, so the idea of the optimal power flow problem is we're maximizing welfare subject to transmission constraints. So the objective function is load benefit minus generator cost. The D is the consumption of load L, P is the production of generator G. The Greek letters you're seeing here in parentheses are the dual multipliers of the respective constraints. So a generator can't produce more than its limit, a load can't consume more than its limit, and there's an upper limit on the amount of power flowing over each line, both in the positive as well as in the negative direction. And we have this R variable that indicates the net injection of power in a certain location. If I'm producing more in that area than I'm consuming, R is positive, but it can also be negative if the opposite is happening. And we have the PTDFs that tell you if you inject a unit of power in area N, this is how much power will flow. Well, actually the way to interpret it, Rn is producing in area N and sending it to a reference bus called the hub. So if you want to ship 1 megawatt from N to the reference, Fkn megawatts of that power will flow from line K. And this is just the definition of Rn. And we also have this energy balance constraint that says that you can't consume more than you're producing, and the other way around. Now, we looked at the KKT conditions last week, and they are here. These are just primal feasibility constraints. We have these complementary slackness conditions, and then we have dual feasibility constraints here, and this is the complementarity of primal variables with respect to the gradient of the Lagrangian with respect to P and D. Now, all this is good, but the important thing is how to use these in our advantage to immediately identify what happens with prices in the network. So if you remember the analysis we did last time, you can play around with these KKT conditions and show that if a generator is producing strictly above zero and below its maximum, you know what the price, you know that the following equality holds. The marginal cost of that generator at that bus is rho for that bus. If a generator is maxed out, can't produce more in that location, you know that this rho is greater than or equal to its marginal cost. And if you know that the generator is producing zero at that location, you know that the rho is less than or equal to the marginal cost of the generator at production level 0. So basically this rho is a threshold. If it costs you more than rho to produce, don't produce anything. If you're cheaper than rho, then produce as much as you can. Otherwise, if it's somewhere in between, just produce, go up your supply curve until you hit the marginal cost that is exactly equal to rho. That's the interpretation. Now, for the example that we saw, there's a way to calculate this rho when we're looking at a network. Does anyone remember the sensitivity interpretation of rho and how you can compute it? Let's go to the example straight. This was the example. No, that's cool. So this was the example. We had expensive generation and demand here, cheap production here, and the mid, actually demand here is 0, and not so cheap but not so expensive production in bus B. How could I compute, how did we go about the, well, how can we compute, for example, the rho in area C? The way to do that is to ask yourself, okay, tell me what the optimal dispatch is. And now, suppose you want to move me a bit out of that optimal dispatch by adding 1 megawatt of extra demand in area C. The cheapest way I can satisfy that megawatt of extra demand is the rho. So if you, now it also turns out that this rho is also the price you should be using when you're running a uniform auction for locational marginal pricing. So if you remember the example I showed you from PJM, this is actually the price of energy also in each area of the network, and it makes a lot of intuitive sense. If the marginal cost of increasing my consumption in a certain area is rho, which is the sensitivity interpretation, then really that's the price signal I should be sending to people. So in the example that we, so the first case that we saw last week, the assumption was that each of the lines here had a capacity of 25 megawatts. And I argued that the optimal solution to that problem was this one over here. So generator A is producing 25, B is producing 75, and the most expensive one, C, is producing 50. Do you remember what the argument to prove that was from last week? We made this local perturbation argument. So we said, what happens if I move A by a bit, if I produce a bit more from A? We showed that that's more expensive. Well, if I decrease it slightly, it's more expensive because it's the cheapest generator in the network. If I increase it slightly, I have to rearrange everyone else in a way that's more expensive, and so on. So we made this local argument about the optimality, but because this is a linear program, you know, finding a local optimum is really like finding the global optimum of the economic dispatch problem. And then there was the question of what are the prices in this network. So what can you immediately say about the rows given this solution? Remember the three cases that I mentioned earlier about
the price of producing from C, because you can't produce from B and send to C because the lines are at their maximum.
At their maximum capacity. So your claim, Benoit, is that the rho at area C is, yeah, that's perfectly correct argument. You're arguing that since you just told me that rho is the marginal cost increase of increasing demand slightly in area C, and since if I increase demand slightly in C, I can't ship, the other two lines are at their limit. So if I increase demand at C by 1 megawatt, the only way to satisfy it is by producing from generator C. There's an even simpler mnemonic rule than that for immediately, because what if I ask you what's rho A? You can start thinking in terms of sensitivity, but there's a heuristic that you can run in your head that's much faster than that. And what you want to be thinking of is, am I looking at something like this or not? Is this the case for this solution here?
I don't know what was the capacity of...
It's infinite. I never, when I give you the example, I never said that.
There is no case.
No.
Then it's producing from K.
So it's strictly within.
This.
because every one of these guys produces positive amount. So all three buses fall under the same situation. So the rows are exactly equal to fuel cost at all three locations. Okay, so the message here is the following, that it's possible for these two buses, and one other observation we made in last lecture was that if I have two buses and the price in bus A is bigger than in bus B, typically what direction is the car going to be flowing?
From A to B.
Right. Typically, it's the case that it is shipped from the more expensive location to the cheaper location. Not necessarily always the case in an optimal solution, but there is a bias. So if you look at the dual feasibility equations, you will see that there is a bias for this to happen. So here we have a situation where that's actually not going to happen. So the row in area A is the lowest. It's 50. The row in area B is 70. But the flow of power over this line is actually 0. So it can be the case, because the other two lines are in the limits, and if you try to ship a bit more from the cheap area to the expensive one, you're going to burn one of the lines. So it can be the case that two buses have a price differential, but there is no power flowing on the line that connects them. That's the first message to keep from this example. The second message, I'll pose it as a question. Does it always have to be the case that rho is equal to the marginal cost of some unit in the network? I would say that, if you're telling me that rho is, the sensitivity interpretation of rho is...
It has to, because when you increase, there is someone that will produce, and that will be then the cost. So the two.
That is the intuition why you would think that. I agree with you fully. So according to your line of reasoning, the rho should be either 50, 70, or 100 in all three buses. And that's the message of the second case that you have here. Here's another situation. The only thing that's changed relative to the previous situation is that line BC is 50 megawatts and line AC is 60. You can, again, solve the problem and get this dispatch here. And actually this created a lot of practical debates in the industry when Bill Hogan was advocating it as the way to clear markets. Intuitively, people were thinking, well, and it turned out, and you'll see in this example that this can happen, it turned out that sometimes the price in a bus was not equal to any of the marginal costs of any of the generators. And people were turning around and saying, well, how can you be charging a price that's not equal to the marginal cost of someone that's going to make up for it? It didn't make sense to people as a pricing method, but here's why it can happen. So in this situation here, if I increase demand in area C, what's the cheapest way to provide it? What do you want to do if you increase demand in C? What's the immediate option you're going to check first?
Send from A to C.
From A. It's the cheapest way to satisfy demand. And why would so when you're shipping from A to C, how much? 1 megawatt. How much of that is going to flow over here? 2/3. And the rest, 1/3, is going to go the long way. And let's see if that causes a problem. So in this example, we have BC is, I think it was 60 megawatts, 50 megawatts, and AC is 60. Now the problem is here. AC is already jammed. It's at its limit. So you can't satisfy all of C by just using A. And that's where now prices that are not equal to just a single generator's fuel cost can arise. The cheapest way to satisfy this demand C is to, it turns out that the cheapest way to react is to back up A by 1 megawatt, and that opens up space in the lines, and then ship 2 megawatts from B. You can try combinations if you want, or you can sit down and think analytically about the argument, but you will discover that there is no cheaper way to respond to this demand increase in C. So you back up A by 1 megawatt, that opens up 2/3 megawatts of capacity on this line here, and B takes them up. And so what you get from this 1 megawatt decrease is you save actually fuel costs, $50 by reducing that 1 megawatt, but then you're increasing the cost by using more of B. B costs $70 per megawatt hour, 2 megawatts go 140, so the cheapest way to react is 90. That's not equal to any of the marginal costs of any of the generators. So it can happen with LMPs that they're not equal to any of the marginal costs. That's the second message. Oh, sorry, I went ahead of myself. Okay. This is the third message. The third message is that LMPs don't have to be unique. There could be a range. The way to think of that in terms of sensitivity is that sensitivity of a convex optimization program can be two things. It can be the change in objective function if I increase a right-hand constraint, or the change if I decrease the right-hand side. And depending on whether I increase or decrease, different things could happen. So sensitivity can be looked at in these two different ways, and that means we can also get two different rows. So in this third situation, these are the line capacities, 50, 50, and 25. This is the optimal solution. And you will notice that the lines that are carrying power to C are at their limits here. So they're both, the flows are both 50, the limits are also 50. So if you increase demand at area C by 1 megawatt, only C, generator C can serve it. So 1 LMP is the fuel cost of generator C. But the other way to think of sensitivity is how much cost I'm saving if I decrease demand in area C by 1 megawatt. And in that case, what happens is the best way to respond is by moving your cheapest generator up and decreasing 2 megawatts from generator B. So here you're incurring an extra cost of 50, you're saving 140, so the change, the decrease in cost is 90. So you get this range of anything between $90 and $100 will in fact be an LMP. It's a valid LMP. So these are the three messages from this example. First of all, you can have buses connected and one is more expensive than the other, but power is not flowing from the more expensive to the cheaper one. It can happen. Second, LMPs don't have to be equal to the fuel cost of any given generator. And third message is that there could be a range of LMPs in each bus. Okay. Okay. And that brings us to a more detailed discussion of the economics of the optimal power flow. So what I want to talk about to you today, and it's plenty of material, so I'll just go as far as I can today, is the following. First, I want to formally prove to you that whether we run a uniform price, locational marginal pricing auction, the way it's done currently in, for example, PJM, the largest market worldwide, which is in the United States. So they run an LMP auction. Or the alternative, for example, would be bilateral trading, so gathering everybody in a room and having them look for the best deals by selling and buying from each other. You would get the same outcome. That's a theoretical claim. You saw it last week with a 2-bus example. This week I want to show you the full argument for an arbitrary network, not just a 2-bus network. And then we'll discuss in more detail some of the aspects of competitive pricing with transmission constrained networks. In particular, you will see that when you run an LMP auction, some money is left on the side and collected by the system operator. And there was a debate in the industry that this is unfair and you're charging loads more than you should be. And there's this counter argument that no, this is a signal that you need to build a transmission line in that area. And if that surplus is correctly reallocated, you really give people the incentive to build lines in the right areas. And then after we go through that, if we have time, this is an interesting example of redispatch is an alternative market design to locational marginal pricing that, for example, was implemented in the early days in California and was one of the reasons that the California market collapsed in 2001. So there are ways to design transmission markets that don't look like LMP pricing. They look really reasonable, but when you try them in practice, they collapse because there are ways you can game them. And then there's been also a long-standing debate about how detailed the locational pricing should be, and that's also relevant in Europe because Europe doesn't have LMP pricing. So we have a single price typically for every country. So it's like we're collecting all the buses in a given country, and we're thinking of them as a single zone. So all of those buses have a single price, and that can create problems that are very real for market makers and system operators today. And if I have time, I'll go through that as well. But the first item on the agenda is to prove the efficiency of bilateral markets for transmission. Okay, so I'm just repeating the KKT conditions of the optimal power flow problem. We will come back to these because to prove the efficiency argument, we will want to show that the alternative market design that I'm proposing to you, it's going to have a bunch of KKT conditions, and I will argue that those KKT conditions will be identical to these. And since KKT conditions are necessary and sufficient for optimality, any market design that produces the same KKT conditions means you will get the same allocation. Okay, so what does a bilateral market look like? Let me try and refresh your memory about LMP pricing first. Do you remember how an LMP auction was conducted? What were the rules of the game? It's helpful to think of the first homework you had when you're thinking of LMP pricing. Your first homework didn't have transmission in it, but the format of the auction was very similar. What did you do in your first homework? Or maybe it was second homework. We played an auction game. What did you submit?
Free block.
Blocks. Price quantity pairs. How did we clear the auction. What was the price you got?
The intersection between bids and
Supply and demand, right? That's the geometric way of thinking of it. Do you remember what's the ample way of thinking of it, like in terms of the math program?
just display a constraint, the underlying
Of which one?
of the markets.
The energy balance. Right. The sum of the R's, well, the sum of production equals demand. The dual multiplier of that was the price. LMP pricing is almost the same. What's the only difference? You submit exactly the same information, is there's just one difference.
Constraint on the transmission multipliers.
That's the lambdas. It's not that one that you get paid. It's the rho. The one you're referring to is the lambdas. It's the rho, which is the dual multiplier of this guy here. So this is the one, this is the constraint we're looking at, and the price we're rewarding. Okay. The one I understood you were referring to was this one over here, right? That one comes up also, but in a different context. Okay, so that's the LMP option. And so then, depending on where you're located, you get a different price, which creates a bunch of prices in different areas, which is one of the things that annoys many people about LMP pricing. Okay, let's think of what would happen if we were just all collected in a room and we started looking for good deals to make with each other. And there has to be something more in this situation than just putting us in a room, because maybe Caitlin is the cheapest one and she makes a really low price offer, but and she trades with me too. I jump in and take her price, but she's got a lot of power to send, and she's got to send it over a constrained line. So if we actually want to make the trade, yeah, we can agree to make it, but then if we actually attempt to trade the power, we're going to burn the line. So it's not enough to just put people in a room and have them make deals with each other when you have a transmission network. You also need to define a piece of paper, literally, which is a right to use a line. So if the two of us want to trade, one of us, after we agree, we also have to see our trade, how much power it's going to use on each of the lines. And then one of us has to buy rights for those lines and go to the system operator and say, me and Caitlin agreed, so here is also our rights for using the lines. So we're not only exchanging energy, but we're also buying space in the lines. And for example, suppose these two lines have the same reactance. Caitlin, how many rights, and suppose the two of us agree for 1 megawatt exchange. How many rights, and suppose you're the one responsible for buying the rights. How many rights on each line do you have to present to the operator? If the two of us make an agreement to, I buy from you, how many pieces of, how many different rights do you need to buy, first of all? Two.
On both lines.
Yeah.
You have to buy for half on each line.
Half and half. You have to buy half and half. So, in general, when someone in area M is trading with someone in area N for a general network, how many lines do they have to buy for, how many rights do they have to buy for line K in general? And here it's helpful to remember the linearity property of PDFs. So think of also the hub when you're answering this question. There's a line here, line K. How much of this line are we using when we're shipping 1 megawatt from M to N? You remember what is the definition of the PDF? What were you thinking? Here you could see it. It's easy to see here. In a general situation, you remember what is the definition, the exact definition of FKN? It's the flow on line K when I ship a megawatt from N to the hub. So there are two transactions here that I can make and achieve through the hub and achieve what I want to achieve. Ship from N to the hub and from the hub to N, which would use up how much of the line?
So it's the amount of electricity times F MH and plus the amount of electricity times FHN.
Remember, the indexing is a line and a bus.
NH.
So F of which line? Line K, generally, and which one comes first? When I send 1 megawatt here, let me draw this another way. This transaction here is equal to 1 plus hub to N. Another 1. How much flow on line K because of this? It's by definition, right, of PTDF. It's FKN. And from hub to N, it's the opposite of N to hub, so it's minus FKN. So basically in your head, that's really what you did when you said half and half here. It's that computation, but something you can actually see. Now, in a system like PJM, which has 18,000 lines, each deal I make with each different person, how many rights do I need to present to the system operator?
How many lines?
How many rights?
How many lines per day?
18,000. So it's the number of lines. For each deal you make, you have to, cut a tree and make 18,000 pieces of paper out of it and go to the operator and say, okay, I agreed with Benoit, and here is my right for line 1, my right for line 2. It's an abstraction, right? So bilateral trading would never work that way, but it's a useful abstraction because if you can assure yourself that you can establish the competitive property of LMP pricing by showing its equivalent, bilateral trading. So how would you, the question now is how you would, okay, now I would like you to do this exercise on your own instead of just showing you the solution, because I think it's very useful in terms of understanding how to model a competitive market. So I would like to define for you SGN as the amount of power sold from generator G to customer N, and BLN is the power bought by load L from a supplier in area N. Okay. So when I'm thinking of writing a market model, I have to be thinking of what the products are that are being traded. So in a bilateral market, what are the products that are being traded?
A range of power.
It's power.
A range at certain cost.
Come again?
A range of power at a certain cost. That's what we expect to have when we are.
There's a market for energy, you're right. Is that the only market? Is that the only resource that we're competing for?
The right to use the lines.
Exactly. There's also a market for rights now, because there's only a limited amount of these certificates out there, and we're all running for them. So we're competing against each other to make the best deals with each other, but we're also competing to buy rights. Okay, so we know what the ingredients of the market are. We have a market for energy, and we have a market for rights, given the rules I just described of trade. So each of these products will have a price. Now, because each different area is really a different market for energy, it's very well the case that because of the transmission constraints, price at area A will be priced different from price at area B. So each area will have a price rho n, and the price of the rights, I will call it lambda k plus the right to use the line in the reference direction, and lambda k minus the right to use it in the opposite direction. When I'm thinking, and now when you're, so what I'm trying to do with this example right now is to help me kind of give you the steps of modeling that you need to take in your head to build a market model. And so when I'm thinking of modeling the market, now I have to start thinking, what is each individual player trying to achieve in this market? If you remember from lecture 2, we had that for price-taking agents, I'm assuming that the price of the product in this market is given. I cannot influence it by my actions. And I would adjust my quantity to maximize my profit. Okay. So what should the generator quantity adjustment, there's no, this is harder than a piece of rock. So basically the ingredients to building a market model are what are the products, who are the players or agents, and then we have a quantity adjustment process, and we have a price adjustment process. The answer to what are the products in our case is there's energy and there's transmission rates. Energy has a price, rho n. Transmission rates have a price, lambda k. What are these agents trying to achieve? So I'm a trader. I own a generator in some location, n of g. So let's call n of g the location of generator g. And I'm deciding on my production G. This is my decision variable. What should my objective function be? What does a generator do when they're quoted a price? So basically, I'm reluctant to move on because if you don't get, we're still at a fairly simple stage of the model. So if you don't get this, it might be tricky to move to the more complicated stuff. Think of how you're deciding on this if you're told what the prices are. Think of the examples of jeans that I gave to you last week. I mean, when you're buying jeans, you know, if you know that the jeans in Brussels are 200 euro and the ones in Charleroi are 25, and it's only going to cost you 15 euro of gasoline to drive down there, you're going to go to Charleroi. You're not going to stay with your local market. You're going to move. How would we capture this in this model, given this decision variable here, and given also the parameter here?
You look at all the prices in the market and you check if bringing it to where you are, so buying the rights, what is the price, what is the most efficient, so you have to actualize the price with the right list price.
Let's break that down into its pieces. So you want to maximize profit, that's what every agent is doing. That consists of some revenues and some costs. So what are your revenues? You use the variables that you have at your disposal. This is representing the fact that you're asking everybody when we're in the room. I'm asking everyone, how much are you willing to buy it? How much are you willing to buy it? How much are you willing to buy it? And I'm going to sell it to the highest price area. And now that you have some costs that are coming into your decision. don't think about the transmission is the trickiest one to think about for the moment. Just in terms of modeling, it's not that bad to model, but what's the obvious cost you have as a generator?
Production.
Fuel cost, right, production. And for the rights, I also introduced a new decision variable, FGK, which is the amount of rights on for line K, but by G. How much would you pay for rights? Well, you're basically gonna when you're using up rights in the positive direction of a line, if the line is congested in that direction and the price is positive, you're gonna pay this much. So lambda k here is a product of this piece of paper that allows you to send from over line k in the reference direction. But I'm also gonna add this term here, and I've changed the sign. So why have I changed the sign in this situation? You want to be counting it as a cost. So if the F is negative, you want that to count as a cost if the line is congested in the opposite direction. That's the reason for changing the sign. If we had kept the sign as a minus, then when flows are negative, this is counting as if it's helping the objective function, but that's not what we're trying to capture. We're trying to capture the fact that if we are sending power over the line in the opposite of the reference direction, then we need to pay for that. That's why we're changing the sign here. The F can be positive or it can be negative. When it's positive, you pay the price. When it's negative, you pay the price, but since you want to have it counted as a cost, you're using the plus sign. Okay, and
so if lambda plus is, so if k is positive, then lambda k is going to be a positive value as well, and lambda k minus is going to be
what do you mean if k is positive?
If fk is positive,
right,
you're going to have a lambda k plus that is positive but non-zero, and lambda k minus is going to be zero.
Yes.
Okay.
Since a line can be congested in both directions. But you also want to capture the fact that I want to have a way to model the fact that it can be expensive to ship in this direction, but also it can be expensive to ship in this direction. If I only use this term, I can't capture this effect.
But the fact of the line is congested in that side, and you want to, in fact, it's helping the other people. So you could be paid for it, and in this case it's cost you almost zero.
When I'm building a market model, I'm assuming that any product that is in the market is going to have a non-negative price. Now, when you're looking at a centralized optimization, you're right, two variables can have negative values, but part of the definition of price adjustment is that any product that's out there, no one's going to pay me for buying it. I'm going to have to go for it. So so to capture this influence, we add the term there. Okay. One last question before I show you the full. So what I introduced this fk. You have already all the ingredients you need to define it based on what I've told you so far. So here we're maximizing over the BGs, the SGNs, and the FK. What should FK be? When you are producing and then selling somewhere, how much of the line are you using? So I'm generator G, I'm located in area N of G, I'm injecting PG, and I'm selling to a bunch of different buyers in this network, and there's a hub. So I'm selling SG1 here, SG2 here, and so on. So what's, well, the production is going this way. How much of line K do I need to buy? This is the one. Let's take it step by step. How much of flow on line K is this action causing here?
From G to H.
From G to the N of G, bus N of G to the hub. How much flow is that causing on line K?
You mean in general, or just in that case, because there is only one
answer? This is not a representation of the physical graph. It's just a graphical way to describe the transactions. It's not the actual. Yeah, sorry, this could be confused as representing the power system. It's not representing the power system. I'm just drawing the actions, the transactions that are taking place. Is that
FKG times NG?
Remember, F is indexed over lines and nodes. FKG is line and generator.
FKNG times NG.
Good. Okay. And then all these guys. So you got rights to send all this power to the hub, but your client is in Russia or Greece. So maybe the hub is, I don't know, in Belgium, of course. So how do you get it from
minus K and
that?
N of what? I don't know the name of the Fn or of which letter?
So, SGN, you could say for selling to customer at N, but then for selling to all of them,
okay, so
it's this much.
Times
SGN. PG is the variable to send it to the hub, and then you're spreading it out through these S variables. That's the idea of the model. One last constraint in this problem, well, apart from the obvious one, which is the technical maximum of the generator, is that what I'm selling is what I'm producing. So big G is the total of my sales. This full model is the quantity adjustment process of a price-taking agent that is playing in both an energy market as well as a transmission market, but a bilateral trading model. Okay, you buy it, looks reasonable. All right, so this is what I'm showing here. That's what you see in the slide here. And for consumers, the situation is similar. Yeah, before going to that, I then present to you the KKT conditions of the bilateral trading model. And now you should start thinking of, here's a bunch of KKT conditions just for generators, not for the full market. I wonder how they compare to the KKT conditions of the full OPF. And you will start seeing similarities. And the way to formally establish that these two different markets are doing the exact same thing is to show an equivalence between the two sets of KKT conditions. So for the, let me see how we're doing on time, because we're moving a bit slower than I anticipated. Yeah, we're not doing great. Okay, I'll just go through the KKT conditions of the generator problem and then we can take a break. Okay, so these some differences to note from the KKT conditions of the full optimal power flow problem are the following. This phi dual variable is only one in the full OPF problem. It's not indexed by G. The psi's are also not indexed by G. So what you can observe though is that my claim is the following. This psi, when I'm collecting the KKT conditions from all the generator problems, the psi won't be different from generator to generator. I can drop the G index. Do you believe my claim or you think I'm a liar? I can tell you without even looking at your problem, at your specific network, and if it's a 3-node network or a 3 million node network, I can tell you without even looking at the details that the psi variables are going to be identical for each generator in this market. There's one equation here which can make you conclude that. Right, right. Everyone sees the same price for transmission. So this KKT, this equality constraint is going to show up in the KKT conditions of each generator subproblem. So as long as everyone is seeing the same price for transmission, which they are in a competitive market, the psi is just really changing by line. It's not also dependent by generator. And the same then, once you plug, you drop the dependence here, you can make the same argument for the phi. The phi doesn't change really from generator to generator, as long as everyone is seeing the same transmission prices. And then you can also do a substitution using this equality in this constraint, and you arrive at, so that's all the tricks I'm doing here. The psi just becomes indexed by k, the phi uses its G index, and you do a substitution, you get this, this becomes this. And if you look back at the KKT conditions of the full OPF problem, this 1, 2, 3 plus the rest over here is identical to a subset of the KKT conditions of the full OPF. So we're 1/3 of the way there. Now there's 2 more blocks of the original KKT conditions that we want to show are identical, and once we show that, we've shown the equivalence. The practical way to think of what I'm trying to get at is, suppose like you're asked to build a market model for bilateral trading. The way to do it would be to find who the agents are in the market model and plug their KKT conditions into the same optimization problem. So math programming languages like Ample can call on K-neutral, which is a nonlinear programming solver, and it can solve KKT systems like this. These are constraints that you can describe in Ample. There is a complementarity command. Now, this system is underdefined because we're only looking at the problem from the point of view of the generator. We've identified the mechanics of how a generator behaves, but there's more into this universe than just generators. So, for example, how are these prices formed? The other obvious piece of the puzzle that is missing is the loads. So, continuing this, recipe of building a market model, we found what the agents are. We wrote out the maximization problem of the generator. Now we have the load profit maximization problem. The load is really a mirror agent. It's like it's like a generator looking himself in the mirror. If you think about it, a load is really doing the same things. It's just that it's buying instead of selling, which gives rise to the load optimization problem. So this is the benefit of load. D here is the analog of P for the generator problem. B, what do you think that represents?
What do you consume?
What it consumes is actually D, but it has to buy it from someone.
So the cost.
It's the actual action of buying is the B variable.
And rho is marginal.
Rho is the price it can buy it from suppliers in Ariane. So the benefit of consumption is this term. This is how much the load pays to buy it from different suppliers. So with this summation term, you're introducing the option of buying from anyone in the room. You're not restricted to a specific seller. And the total you consume is the sum of what you've bought from everybody. Yeah, okay. So I can't. Why do I have the transmission payment terms again? What would this model imply if these did not exist? If I remove them?
I will simply take the generator that proposes electricity at the lowest cost, but it wouldn't take part of the transmission costs.
Yeah. So that would be a misrepresentation of reality, right? If you took these away from the problem, you would have to force this load to only buy from its location. Otherwise, it's breaking the rules of the game. The game, the way I described it to you, these are the rules of the game in words. You can't buy from someone out of your area unless you buy the rights. So this is how you're translating a verbally described bunch of rules into math programs. Okay, so this is the load problem. These are the load KKT conditions. Here I've already done the tricks that I did earlier with a load problem, with the generator problems. I dropped the L index. It shows up. The psi is the dual multiplier of this index here, which is one different index for each L and each K. I immediately dropped it off, applying the same logic. The full details are in the course notes. So here's the KKT conditions for the loads. Okay, that's another block of KKT conditions, one block for each different load in the network. You plug that into your ample model, and now you've described this market more accurately. You've described what the loads are doing, you've described what the generators are doing, but there is one element missing, which is the process of how prices adjust. This is referred to in Staff's book as price adjustment, and I'm using that same terminology in the course notes. We used the same idea in the economic dispatch problem. The argument was that if there is more supply than there is demand, intuitively thinking, in a competitive world, if there is more supply for a product than there is demand, there is a pressure for prices to go lower. Right. If in the opposite case, upward. That's a complementarity condition, if you think about it. Unless you have a binding equality constraint, if prices are positive, then you have to have an equality constraint. You have to have that for each product supply equals demand. Now there's the possibility that for certain products the prices are zero, in which case you can have an oversupply. You can't have an undersupply, but you can have an oversupply. And that can happen when prices for something are exactly zero. So to finish up the description of your market, you want to write out the complementary conditions for each of the products. So let's think first of the transmission rights products. So here in price adjustment we have two types of markets. We have markets for transmission rights and markets for energy. Well, let's write out the energy market clearing conditions. So the price for energy will be non-negative at each location, and if you actually have to pay something for energy, the level at which this price will adjust itself will be such that supply equals demand. How can you write supply equals supply is greater than or equal to demand for area n, given the variables you have in your problem? How much energy is sold in this location? That's from generator G. So total.
You asked me the amount of energy sold by generator G?
No. In location N, total.
Sum of SG.
Sum of S over what?
The generators.
Right. And the demand, the other way around, is the sum of what's being bought. Okay, this is the price pressure process that Jean-Francois correctly. I got it right? No? Yes?
No problem.
Cool, okay, that Jean-Francois referred to. If these are not equal, this will change so that they get equal. Unless this is zero, in which case we can have an oversupply. That's the, that's that. Okay, we did this for the energy market, for each area. We also have a KKT condition for the prices for the transmission rights, which looks like this. This is the price for transmission rights. This is the supply of transmission rights. These are how many rights are out there, the quantity that is available, and how much people are asking for them is these two terms here. There will be generators asking for them, and there will be loads asking for them. And this price will adjust itself so that the total request is equal to the limit, or if the request is less than the limit, the price must be zero. Okay, same for the opposite direction. And now we have all the ingredients of a bilateral trading model. So now you take these KKT conditions here, you take these for the loads, and you take these for the generators, you plug them into the same model, and the claim is that the output of the model in terms of production and consumption will be the same as if you had solved the optimal power flow problem centrally. How is this system different from the optimal power flow problem? Is this model richer, or is the optimal power flow model richer? Or are they identical? Are there more things here or fewer? Think in terms of primal variables, for example.
But there is more thing just because you take into account the price of the rights.
You have a lambda k in the OPF too, if you remember. It was a dual variable, it showed up as a different thing. It turns out to be the exact same thing, in fact. But that appears in both. There's something here that doesn't appear in the OPF.
S?
The S, the B, the selling and buying. Even the flow, even the flow decisions are indexed by generator. If you remember in the OPF problem, we just had the flow over a line because we're solving it centrally. All we care about is the flow over a line. Here we're setting up the profit maximization problem of each agent. We have a different flow index for each agent. So it's a richer, it's a much larger model if you think about it. But the claim is that once you take all the KKT conditions of this thing and plug them into the same system, it's gonna, you can sum up all these FGKs over generators, and that variable will behave in the same way as the flow variable behaves in the optimal power flow problem. So, you know, collapsing this, aggregating this over all generators doesn't really, you don't really lose anything. That's the claim I'm making. And the way to prove it is just doing a bunch of calculations. So I'm gonna define this flow variable for this model as the sum of the flow decisions over all agents. I'm gonna define this R variable as this quantity here. And if you go through the KKT conditions of the market, you will see that this F behaves like the S variable of the OPF problem, the R behaves like the R variable of the OPF problem. So basically, the optimal solution you're going to get from the bilateral trading model will be identical to the optimal solution you will get from the OPF problem. The details are here and in the textbook, but since we're kind of behind, I won't go through them in detail. But you can easily check if you do the algebra and then you compare KKT conditions, you will see that they are identical. Now, this conclusion is important. There is content in this conclusion. And one important aspect of this conclusion is that you can basically, it's a modeling conclusion, and it's actually something that Bill Hogan took advantage of when he was working for the International Energy Agency. Instead of setting up this entire market model, if I have 10,000 market players in this system, this will create an enormous set of KKT conditions. Instead of doing that, instead of creating this enormous set of KKT conditions that accurately describes bilateral trade, you can just solve a single optimization problem, which is the centralized optimization problem, and get the exact same result. So you can simulate a bilateral market by actually solving a centralized optimization problem. And that the gain you have is that you can collapse all these decisions and reduce enormously the dimensionality of the problem. And that's how the first electricity market simulation models were set up in the United States, and there's been a whole literature of equivalences between market models and optimization models. So I won't go into that in detail, but what I would like you to keep from this whole presentation is that it's important to understand how to model a market. And there might be also specific exercises that we will try to solve in the next few weeks. But going through this thought process on your own it can be tricky, but it's one of the things that I would like you to take out of the class. Okay, so conclusion is bilateral trade is the same as if you did centralized optimization. The way to prove it is by comparing KKT conditions, and that's that closes that part of the lecture. Now, the next thing I wanted to discuss with you is congestion rent and congestion cost. So, I mentioned earlier that when you're running an LMP auction, there's some money left on the table. And that's probably best illustrated through an example. So let's see this example here. I'm claiming that when we run LMP pricing, the amount of payments that will be made will be greater than or equal to the amount the amount of payments that will be made by loads to buy power will be greater than or equal to the amount of payments made to generators for producing power. Okay, that's the claim, and I will prove it to you in a minute. Let's see the specific example here, which we also saw last week. We have two-bus network, generators in location A, and this is their marginal cost. Generators in location B with this marginal cost, a local demand. So the way we were thinking about this model is we had a remote bus with cheap generation and a bit of demand here, and then a bus which is the city bus with a lot of demand and expensive generation. There was a line connecting these two areas that had the capacity of 500 megawatts. And what we observed happened is that cheap generators shipped as much power as they could to the expensive area to the point that they used up the whole line, and we got the prices for each location. So you will notice that, okay, my claim is that the optimal solution is 600 megawatts. Can you immediately see why that's the case? What's the easiest argument you can use to convince yourself that PA should be producing 600?
Yes, the demand is in A is 100, so the generator A produces 100. After that, he sends what he can in the generator, in the bus B.
Right.
Just the limit, just until the transmission limit is just full.
I agree with you. The question I would have is why not use generators in B?
Why?
Not use generators in area B.
Because repetition cost is.
Right. So the calculation to do is plug 600 into here and notice that this comes out to be $36 per megawatt hour, which is still cheaper than the least expensive production here. So if it weren't for the line, they would even send more. If all of these guys were located in the same area, if there was a line with infinite capacity, A would produce the full demand and still be cheaper. So if A could, it would satisfy 800 plus 100, which is 900, and still be cheaper than the cheapest guy in area B. Because 900, when you plug it into here, it gives you $38 per megawatt hour. So if it weren't for the line, A would max out. Okay. But now there is the line, and we have, we did the calculations. We found that price at area A is $30 per megawatt hour, and price at area B is $46 per megawatt hour. Okay, so how much are loads paying in area A? You what you want to do is see how much demand you have in this area. So that's 100 megawatts times the payments they're making. So that comes out to $3,000 per hour. Loads at B is 36,800. But then if you compare that to the payments that are received by generators, it turns out that there's an excess. So the reason that's happening is because there's more demand located in the expensive area. So the surplus is $8,000 per hour, and that we call the congestion rent. If you were to run an LMP auction, a uniform price auction, those $8,000 every hour would accumulate at the system operator, because the system operator is the one who's acting as the intermediate between the generators that are receiving payments and the loads that are making the payments. So the argument is that some people said, well, you know, if LMP is producing money that's being collected by the system operator, first of all, it means that you're overcharging the electricity. For whatever reason, the loads are paying more than what the generators are receiving, so actually LMP prices suck and they should be cheaper, because why should there be this excess payment? The counter argument to that is that this revenue that's being collected, it represents the need for an investment in land to connect these two areas, which, if built, will bring the cheaper power in. So it's not like the system operator is collecting this cash and then going to the bars and drinking Jack Daniels with it. They are then returning it to market participants in a way that provides them incentives to build the lines. So what I want to show you is, before talking about congestion cost, is, well, actually, yeah, I'll also talk, no, I'll present the congestion cost before showing the proof for the congestion rent. So congestion rent is the extra revenue that's collected by the system operator. Then you have the notion of congestion cost, which is the extra costs are accumulating because of the existence of the line. They're not the same thing. Congestion cost is how much it costs you now, minus how much it would cost you if the line had infinite capacity. It's different from the congestion rate. It's not, they could be, the first intuition is to confuse them, but they're actually different, and we'll see in this example why they're different. So how much are we paying in this case, how much cost are we incurring in this case because with the line over there? This is the cost that's collected from generators in area A. So we're integrating the marginal cost curve over their output. And this is the cost we're collecting from generators in area B, which comes out to 28,500. If the line did not exist, like I argued earlier, the cheapest way to satisfy it is send all the 900 from the generators in area A, that's 26,100, and the difference is $2,400 per hour. So the two things are actually different. Sometimes they coincide, but there's no formal proof that there's a relationship between them. And the proof that congestion rent is non-negative is the following. So this is the congestion rent. So we're taking the locational marginal price at area N. These are the payments made by loads in area N, minus the payments that are made to generators in area N. And we're summing that up over all the locations. That's the definition of congestion rent. Where does this equality come from? If you can recall the OPF problem. Why does this first equality hold?
So because n minus sum of PG equals 0.
Yeah, it's the definition, it's the way I defined Rn in the OPF problem. Now, how about this second equality here? This might be hard to remember, and I wish I had two screens, but if you remember, there was one equality constraining the KKT conditions that said that the LMP is the LMP at the hub minus this stuff. So it's one of the KKT conditions in the problem. And then this one here. So can you see why that one holds?
Because you just split it into sums,
right.
And when you take the sum of phi times Rn, then the sum of Rn is 0.
It's the power balance constraint, yeah. The conservation of energy constraint, so this goes away. And now we are here. If you remember, when Jean-Francois observed earlier, that was from the different problem, but the KKT conditions were the same. The psi k's were equal to lambda k plus minus lambda k minus. That's also the same in the KKTs of the OPF problem. And here comes the nice part. Here, by the way, I've done something else, except for substituting this with one of the KKT conditions. I also changed the order of summation here. Okay, I swapped these. No big deal there. And how about here? it's again by it's by definition basically of what PTTFs are. This is an explicit equality constraint in the OPF problem. And we arrive from here. This one is probably the trickiest to see. For each line, one of two things could be happening. Well, three things. First possibility, the line is not congested. These are 0. Or it is congested in one of its two directions. If it's congested in the positive direction,
then if k is equal to so lambda plus k is lambda plus ktk.
Exactly.
Rest is 0. And
exactly. If it's congested in the opposite direction, then fk is minus tk. The lambda k minus term survives, and you get a plus here. But the important thing to note now is that the congestion rent of the auction is equal to the prices of the transmission times the capacity of the transmission. This is a very useful identity to remember, and it has inspired alternative market designs for transmission constrained networks. But what can you say about this thing here? About its sign? It's non-negative, right? So the dual multipliers are non-negative. So this proves that the congestion revenue collected by an LMP auction is always going to be non-negative. Okay. So this is just talking you through what we just did right now. Okay. Now, that said, a couple of practical debates that have taken place in the industry. I will only have time to talk you through the Enron example, the deck game. Okay, so when the idea of LMP pricing was introduced, people had many complaints. One was there's too many prices in too many different areas. You have this stupid surplus here, and why should the loads be paying more than what generators are receiving? It doesn't make a lot of sense, etc., etc. And there were alternative ideas proposed. One of them was the idea of read dispatch, which was kind of like it looked like it was a simplification of the situation. In particular, what read dispatch proposed was that let's run a uniform price auction ignoring transmission, and people are gonna get a single price. Everyone gets a single price, so that way we don't have to have different prices for different areas. We don't have this. And if you, what happens in a uniform price auction, of course, as far as congestion is concerned? There is none. Everyone gets the same price, and supply equals demand. So then we will award people from the auction, and then we'll look at it. Maybe some line limits are violated given this auction outcome, so then we will pay people individually some side payments to ask them to back off, to make sure that we also respect the line flows. It sounds like a reasonable idea. You run a simpler auction, and then you make side payments asking some specific generators or load to rearrange a bit their schedule so that they don't screw up the network as well. There's two problems with that. First of all, it doesn't put money on the side to create incentives for transmission while the need for transmission exists and it's reflected in the prices. The second problem is you can play very simple games around this proposal, and those games were played in California to an extreme level. That was one of the first hard lessons of deregulation in California. So what, strictly speaking, what is the definition of a rig dispatch market design? We run a uniform price auction, ignoring the transmission constraints. So what you did in the second homework, you submit blocks, and we award based on a single price, the dual multiplier of the power balance constraint, and then we run a second round. In the second round, what we do is we look at the first round schedules, and we solve, well, what we ask for in the second round is not blocks of price quantity anymore. We ask for increment and decrement blocks. An increment block is a statement that I am willing to move away from my schedule by this much for this amount of money. So if I were awarded in the first round, suppose I'm a generator and I'm awarded in the first round 50 megawatts, and I submit an increment bid of 10 megawatts at $10 per megawatt hour. What does that mean? What does this mean? Sorry, a deck bid. A decrement bid. And how is this different from an increment bid of 5 megawatts at $15 per megawatt hour? What am I willing to do here after the first auction is over? Basically what this is saying is I'm willing to move anywhere between, I've been asked to go to 50, but I'm willing to go down 40, but for each megawatt you're pushing me down from the original level, you're going to be paying me $10. Okay, that's a deck bid. An inc bid is of 5 megawatts at $15, means that I'm willing to, after the first auction clears, I'm willing to go up to 55, and for each megawatt you're moving me, you need to pay me $15. So we're running two auctions, basically. And the second auction is not the same as the first, it's a pay-as-bid auction. So in the second auction, I'm going to pay you what you asked for, not a uniform price. So in this example, what would happen if the first auction suppose the first auction here had a price of, a market clearing price of $35. And in the second round, I awarded you 5 megawatts deck. How much would this generator make? First of all, is this generator moving in the first auction or not? It's a uniform price auction, and the clearing price is $35. Is the generator producing or not? Is he in the money? He's in the money. How much is he going to be paid?
$30.
It's a uniform price actually. So it's the same for everyone. The first round is a uniform price. He bid 30, but he got cleared for 35, so he gets paid the uniform price. So the revenue here is 35 times 15. But then after the ISO clears him, they also award him a 5 megawatt deck, which means, but that one is a pay as bid, so there I pay you whatever you bid.
So, the number of megawatt increase times 5.
Exactly. Times?
10.
Exactly. So this is the, so that generator will end up producing 45 megawatts and be paid this amount here. Okay, that's how this situation works. And this is what I'm describing basically here in words. And here's what happened. I wonder how much time we have left. Probably not any at all. No, we're good, right? Okay, we have another 7 minutes. Okay, here's what happened in. Okay, this was the motivation for doing this auction. So basically, what I described to you in words is now described here graphically. I'm presenting here the system, the two-node system that we saw earlier. And I have this residual supply curve and this avoided cost function curve. These curves are derived as follows. Residual supply curve from bus A to bus B. Did I lose you? Did I lose you? I confused you? Or are you discussing something else?
Just for the deck ink.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the price it's 35.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, what is deck and ink? Is it the person who said, okay, you have to?
The ink and the deck is another. It's the same. It's the same one. It's the same generator that submits the ink and the deck, but not simultaneously. This auction is done. We all see the results. Then we have a second round where you can submit an ink and a deck.
Okay, so it's the generator who submits.
Exactly. It's the generator again. So it's the same agent. But oh, I'm very sorry. Here I missed a very important detail. Yeah, here I missed the heart of the whole idea is that if I deck you, you lose this part. If I deck you by 5, you're gonna get paid the 30 only for 45 megawatts, which is what you give me in the end. Sorry, that's the important thing here. So minus 30 times 5. Yeah. So here the reason you might want to be doing this is this doesn't look like a winning proposition in the first place, but because of fuel costs, it might make sense to make this deck bid. Because when you're submitting a deck bid, you also get paid for, you save on fuel if you're decked. So it seems here like this is stupid to do for $10, but it could make sense because your fuel cost might make sense to also submit $10 in the deck. Okay. And oh, minus the 35 times. Sorry. Okay. So the graphically what's going on is shown here. What we have is this two-node network that I mentioned earlier over here. I had the residual cost curve. that cost curve shows from the point of view of area B, what is really the marginal cost that these guys are seeing after the demand in A is satisfied? Who's the cheapest guy that can give them power after A is satisfied? Coming in. It's still from A, but it's the guy who starts at $22 per megawatt hour. Because the first 100 go for local demand. So, you know, the consumers at B, from their point of view, they're seeing a marginal cost that starts from 22 and has the same slope. That's the curve I drew here. It's really saying the same thing as as if you were drawing the original curves, but it motivates this difference, the read dispatch option basically. Now, from the point of view of, so this is what they're seeing in terms of how much cost they're facing, and then in terms of how valuable it is for these local consumers, we describe that using the avoided cost function. The way we get this cost function is you want to now be thinking, if I'm a consumer at area B, how valuable will be the first megawatt coming from area A? Well, the first megawatt coming from area A is going to save me from buying power from a more expensive local supplier. Okay, so this this is like a demand curve from the point of view of consumers in area B. And the way you derive this is thinking how valuable is the first megawatt coming from area A is 58. Why? Because it would replace the 600, the 800 megawatts of demand. So if there weren't any, I'm going to talk through this fast because we're running out of time, but the intuition is the following. If there weren't any transmission line, how much power would come from area A is the intersection of this supply curve and this demand curve. And we would get the result that we've already seen, that we would import 800 megawatts at this price, $38 per megawatt hour. The motivation that people had behind read dispatch was the following. The argument goes as follows. It says, if you run this two-stage read dispatch option, the amount of money that needs to be, the amount of extra money that needs to be paid to generators is equal to this yellow area here. And I mean, some amount of money will have to go to the generators in order to back them off in the deck auction, in the second stage, to make sure that they back off and respect the transmission limits. But this yellow area is much less than the amount of money that would be paid to them, the excess amount of money that would be paid to them, in case we ran an LMP auction. The excess amount of money that would be paid to them if an LMP auction were run is the blue area here. And to see that, we showed earlier that it's the transmission line limit times the LMP difference, the lambdas, which is exactly this height over here. That's why it's the blue area. So people were arguing, you can achieve the same result by running these two rounds, but pay much less to the generators to move them back. Whereas the LMP auction would have to bribe them by much more. Is this argument making sense? Two different options. In both cases, you need to somehow bribe the generators to back off. In the first case, it's a lot, and the loads are going to pay for it. In the second case, it's much less, but you achieve the same result. That was the motivation of running a two-round read dispatch auction. The problem was that, and I'm already out of time, so very quickly, the problem was the following. If you are think of the extreme situation where you are a monopoly supplier in area A, and you don't have any other competitors in area A. If you know this is the way you're going to be paid back, you have every incentive to make extremely aggressive bidding in the first round and overschedule the amount of power you will ship to area B. Since the transmission system operator will run an economic dispatch without accounting for transmission constraints, if your bids are cheap enough, you can schedule an enormous quantity and send it to B. They will clear you for it. And then what will happen in the second round? You can submit reasonably cheap deck bids for backing off that original quantity. And you will get paid the deck bids. So basically this is what I'm showing here. You can schedule an extremely large amount and then be paid back from the deck bids, provided you know you won't have competition in the second round. And if you are a monopoly supplier, a cheap enough monopoly supplier in location A, you can be sure that you won't meet competition in the second round. So you can say, misrepresent the truth about your costs in the first round, get cleared in economic dispatch by an enormous quantity, and then get paid the deck bids. And this is what California, this is the game that California played in the, that Enron played in the California market, which they refer to it as the Death Star. You can go on the internet and see news clips about how they played the game.